All right, good morning. Hello again, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, maybe a few people come.
Well, and I found that I think the Francis was social.
All right, well, so last week we got started on this topic of the history of the Bible in English before and after King James, and I'm glad to see you came back. Let's see, let me start with I had a thing that I was walking around with. There's going to be a program in a couple weeks about the 8th century fragment of the Bible manuscript that I talked about last time, at the OSU Rare Books Library. And it's a couple weeks out, and so I'll get the details on that, but I just had an email, and I thought I had scribbled down, but I'm not seeing it at the moment, so anyway, story of my life. Do you all remember William Tyndale, producer of the first English New Testament of 1526, during a very turbulent time? And so here we start with a nice little image, the martyrdom and burning of Master William Tyndale in Flanders in 1536. So there was a lot of that going around.
So is he English?
Yes.
Yeah, he was.
Yes, he kind of went back and forth. I mean, I think, kind of like fearing arrest and controversy, that kind of thing. So
he had enemies on both sides.
I think so. Yeah. So, quick timeline and review of our kind of basic concepts here. Remember, talking about the Bible, the origin of those texts is essentially 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Jewish culture, Jesus was a Jew, Hebrew, Aramaic, biblical texts in a long and complicated tradition. 2,000 years ago, the 1st century AD, we have, of course, Jesus living and dying. Creation of the New Testament gets underway. Those texts being carried especially via Greek and Latin. Remember also importantly, around 400 AD, probably the most successful or the longest lived definitive Bible that we have so far, St. Jerome's so-called Vulgate, the Latin version of the Old Testament and New Testament, because more or less in the form that we are familiar with, the Old and New Testament. And St. Jerome's text would be copied and copied and copied by hand for 1,000 years until we finally get to the invention of printing. The Roman Catholic Church being dominant in Western Europe, alongside, of course, numerous other Christian sects around. We sort of like to think, well, Western Europe is the focus of everything, but there are other Christian sects, of course, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Syrian, Ethiopian. There are groups of Christians around in different areas, different languages, different nationalities that are lesser known to us, perhaps. And we also talked about what is English. We talked about the Germanic origins of the English language, and that in Old English, so from around the year 1000, there are attempts at translating bits and pieces of the Bible into Old English. Kind of cool. Also, we talked a little bit about the invention of printing by Gutenberg, the 1450s. The very first book ever printed was the Bible. And then another crucial date for us, or time period, is the 15 teens, when the German monk and troublemaker Martin Luther launches the so-called Reformation in Germany. Through this timeline, we have a couple of English New Testaments that we talked about last week. Wycliffe in the late 1300s hand-copied manuscripts, because this is before the invention of printing. Also Tyndale, the English Bible, New Testament, that was printed in 1526 and again in 1534. And I mentioned last time, it was so controversial and suppressed to an extent that only 3 or 4 of the thousands and thousands actually survive today. So, and then we have the establishment of the Church of England by Henry VIII in 1534. Martin Luther started all his trouble around 1517 and through the 1520s. So essentially, the Church of England can be viewed in that context as sort of what the English did to deal with the controversy about Catholicism and so forth. So just a bit about that. The Church of England, aka the Anglicans, is essentially a story of the 1500s, paralleling the story of the Reformation in the 1500s in continental Europe as well. So, of course, we know that Christian sects existed in the ancient Roman province of Britain. The first Archbishop of Canterbury is dated actually to AD 597, so long history. They renounced papal authority in 1534, so again, kind of getting on the Lutheran bandwagon. So we have essentially an English Reformation, in parallel to Luther's Reformation. The reformer Thomas Cranmer developed liturgical texts, the Book of Common Prayer, which of course is still used today. And in a violent and bloody century, for example, there was a brief restoration of papal authority, but it didn't last, and all kinds of commotion back and forth. The so-called Elizabethan settlement, 1559 to 63, essentially concluded the English Reformation. So it's sort of viewed theologically, which I can't give you the details, but what I understand is Anglicanism is sort of a middle path between Lutheranism and Calvinism. So be it. So let's move on now to English Bible number 3 by Miles Coverdale. This is the first complete printed Bible in English. And the times they are a-changin'. 1535, unlike Tyndale, this one is actually authorized by the king. So.
But not the Pope.
So he was an Augustinian friar who embraced Lutheranism and became the first Protestant. Bishop of Exeter, studied philosophy and theology at Cambridge, so pretty sharp guy. So this Bible, again, it is the Old Testament and New Testament, the complete Bible, essentially reprinting Tyndale's New Testament, and then the Old Testament produced from multiple sources, Latin and also Luther's German translation of the Old Testament. And as far as the sort of the artwork to embellish it, he did pretty well with that, with woodcut images by the German artist Hans Holbein, who's, a renowned, famous, very world-class artist of the 16th century. So Coverdale lived from 1488 to 1569, and he actually died a peaceful death, which, that's not true of all of our heroes. So that is Bible number 3. And let me point out a couple things. So along with the Latin, Coverdale acknowledges the importance of Dutch. So check this out. Biblia, the Bible, that is the Holy Scripture of the Old and New Testament, faithfully and truly translated out of Dutch, i.e. German, and Latin into English. And there you have it. Just the style, the inspiration, we might say, is probably inspired by Luther, because if you look at the title page of Luther's Bible from 1534, Biblia, that is the whole Holy Scripture in German, and then Martin Luther, Wittenberg, and so on. And so I mean, the sort of the layout and the style, the vibe, is quite similar. On Coverdale's, we see a king down here. That's not Jesus or a Bible person. That's none other than King Henry VIII. So who needs a pope? You got Henry VIII. More about Coverdale. He knew Latin. He didn't know much Hebrew and Greek, so he relied heavily on other translations, like we mentioned, the Luther. But he gave a lot of rich and lasting phraseology that is still familiar to us today. So, for example, what Tyndale had said, "And forgive us our trespasses, even as we forgive them which trespass us." And Coverdale said, "And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." That's pretty.
He's Presbyterian.
That's a lot better, right? I mean, okay. So now we move on to Bible number 4, 1537, the so-called Matthew Bible. The publisher John Rogers produced the first authorized English Bible under the pseudonym Thomas Matthew. So Matthew is the producer of the Bible, except it's a pseudonym for John Rogers. So it was authorized, but didn't use his own name on it. So anyway, go figure. He had denounced Rome in 1535 and was following Tyndale. Rogers / Matthew was a pretty careful editor, essentially reprinting Tyndale's New Testament, like Coverdale, and then translated some of the Old Testament and then took the rest from Coverdale. So a lot of, essentially, if you have a good translation, why would you retranslate? Not really any such thing as copyright or any of that at this point. It is said that he added overtly Protestant notes and annotations to the text. And he was burnt alive for the Protestant faith in 1555. So there's still...
In England?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, there was back and forth. Long and complicated. There's a whole giant book that you might have heard of, John Fox's Book of Martyrs, if that's familiar. It's a big book that came out in many, many editions in the 16th, 17th century. That's an account of all the religious persecution back and forth, and murders and executions and martyrs. It's all about the people who got murdered in the 16th century.
Sounds like a lovely book.
Yeah. Well, we could do a study on that.
It's in exquisite detail.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you have a stomach, you don't want to read it because it is so horrifying.
Exactly.
You read the book?
No, it's mentioned in the Cahill book that I'm reading.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like Coverdale, this one is dedicated to King Henry VIII. And there's the title page, and in fact, you see across the bottom there, set forth with the King's most gracious license.
Well, it makes sense that there would be that the whole establishment of pre-Henry VIII would not just flip, to then be Protestant, it would make a lot of sense that there'd be nothing but turmoil.
Yeah, sure. I mean, changing religions in a whole society, in a whole country, I mean, that's a really big deal. I mean, and so I'm sure there was a lot of sort of pretending to convert, but secretly you still believe, or I mean, who knows? The whole spectrum of confusion, uncertainty, and hopefully a little bit of faith, and that's sort of the history of the 16th century, I guess. Here's just a little example from the Matthew's Bible. I mean, a little bit user-friendly. Here we've got the first book of Moses called Genesis, and notice the upper left, a little annotation, the creation of the world. So, I mean, that's nice. And then some biblical cross-references. And notice even a little summary before the first chapter. How heaven and earth, the light, the firmament, the sun, the moon, the stars. It was, so a nice kind of user-friendly additions and tools are being built into the Bible step by step, and that's a trend we will continue to see. Do notice? So we've got the first chapter there. Notice there's not verses, right? Verse 1, verse 2, verse that doesn't exist yet. Stay tuned, because we'll get to it. Okay, there's another Bible in 1539, and I mean, it seems like a good marketing strategy to declare it the Great Bible. This one was produced by we know the name Coverdale. Coverdale revising the Matthew Bible for all the churches in England. Controversial as usual, printed in 1539. So it's really interesting. There's a rapid sequence of these different versions of the Bible. So there's enough, uncertainty, questioning, that we have quite a sequence of Bibles being brought out. Editorially scrupulous, we are told, a large folio format, so that would be nice, but refrained from notes and annotations. So it's pretty much just the biblical text. And guess who is on the cover? Of course, we have Henry VIII, depicted as distributing to his people for public use and education. And see, he's got Bibles in his hands. And all right. And it was, this one was kind of a big deal. 7 editions were produced from 1539 to 1541. And keep in mind what we say when we mean 7 editions. The way early printing worked was that you had to take the little metal letters and put them into a frame for every word, every page, by hand, upside down, backwards, and then print one at a time. And the whole Bible is produced doing that. So it's, probably dozens of poorly paid guys working for months on end, to produce a Bible. So the Great Bible was preeminent in English churches for around 30 years. Like a recap of what we've seen so far, the 1500s, we have Martin Luther. The 1530s, Cromwell establishes the Reformation in the guise of Church of England, in King Henry VIII's name. And essentially, we're sort of flooding the kingdom with various English Bibles, is how it turns out. So the earliest English Bible translations were highly controversial and stuff, but really there's kind of an onslaught of Bibles.
So when you say 7 editions, is that 7 printings?
Yeah, reprints.
Or 7?
Yeah.
Okay.
right, reprint of the same thing. Yeah. So.
You know, David, in one of your previous series that I read the book on Martin Luther that you recommended, I didn't realize that he did the Bible, but he actually reprinted it, what, 3 or 4 times in the 1530s, just because he was translating what was the Latin in a little bit different words and things like that. And so you could see why there'd be controversy, because you could read something and someone would translate it from the Latin in a different way.
Right, yeah. So, Martin Luther, I mean, in conjunction with the Reformation, this thing he unleashed, he translated the New Testament by about 1520 or so, within a few years. So along with sort of all the controversy, he's managing to do that. And then he actually translated and produced the whole Bible, Old and New Testament, in the most famous edition, I think the first edition was 1534, but then his Bible was reprinted constantly.
Now, is that called Luther's Bible or the German Bible? What did they title that?
Well, the title of it is Die ganze Heilige Schrift, the Holy Scripture. I mean, by Martin Luther. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So.
Question.
Yeah.
So every time they had a reprinting, had they stored those tiles?
No.
They had reset all of them for every page every time.
Did everyone hear that? Did they sort of store those pages so that they could reprint, pull them out and reprint? No. The little metal letters, that you stick in there to make a text and make a page and print it, those are like the most valuable thing you have. You cannot, make a page and then all of those little letters are tied up and you can't use them again. No, you can't do that. Every reprint, every time you start page 1 in, I-N, the beginning, T-H-E, and it's backwards, and every page, every reprinting, every time. So,
So they'd make 1,000 copies or 10,000 copies of that page.
Exactly.
Then they'd move on to the next page.
Exactly, right. One page at a time. And after, 400 pages or something, you got the Bible. And you have maybe, print runs varied from maybe a few hundred to, maybe 1,000, something like that. But yeah, so it's, yeah.
Maybe you covered this, I wasn't here last week. When you say flooding the kingdom with various English Bibles, what was the literacy rate, and then who, was it just the wealthy, the elite who had been educated, who could read, who were utilizing these, or are they church leaders then that are using these various versions with their congregations?
Yeah,
so the dissemination of the information when there are so many versions out there, what is the actual reach of information to the public?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't know, and I don't know if anybody knows, but yes, indeed, literacy rates were, in the Middle Ages, literacy rates were near zero, unless you're a monk or something. With the invention of printing, gradually literacy and the ability to read, increased over time. And yet illiteracy also, especially women, mostly. So there's a ton of stuff that's been written about literacy and reception of books and who could read what and that kind of thing. And I think ultimately we don't know exactly, but we do know there was demand enough to have all of these Bibles created. So probably there is, going along with that, an increase in literacy. But you kind of have to look at it just circumstantially like that, because it's not the kind of thing that
There's no ballot poll.
yeah, right. There isn't like a census, how many people are in your house and how many of them completed the 8th grade, and you don't have that. So yeah, it's a mile-wide topic, and I mean, I think you ask exactly the right question that is a key issue that we don't have an exact answer. But yeah, these Bibles, there's motivation to produce them, so probably somebody's reading. Then again, probably most of them are sitting on a shelf, not being read a lot of the time as well. So, John?
Well, 2 things. We have that Bible on our communion table. That's probably, looks like all those checks, those 500 or whatever, were just 1 or 2 per church, right? And also, I think it was within my lifetime, the Catholic Church were in Latin, and practically nobody do that in the last 200 years, I suppose.
Right, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Catholic, because we're coming to a Catholic thing here in a minute, but yeah, all right, let's see. So, let's look now at a Bible from 1557 for the New Testament, and then 1560, whole Bible, Old and New Testament, called the Geneva Bible. Again, all the turmoil in England over this. We have the accession of Catholic Queen Mary in England in 1553. She's against Protestantism and against having English Bibles. So this guy, William Whittingham, flees to an English church in Geneva, Switzerland, and produced a new Bible based on the great Matthew Tyndale, as well as knowing Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. So it's interesting, every Bible is like this building on previous version, plus maybe the person's own knowledge of the languages and stuff. And so, I mean, it's probably fair to say that Bibles are getting better, just textually. I mean, as time goes on, we hope. This would be the 6th English Bible, and this is one that I have a facsimile to pass around so you can get a look at it. So facsimile meaning that one of the 1557 versions is just reproduced. So it's like looking at the old one, but in a nice new printing and binding. So I will pass that around, and I would point out a couple things about it. Let's see. This is from the 1560, and mercifully it uses Roman typeface, so it's like the kind of type we're used to reading, not that weird old English looking stuff. And it's interesting because this is sort of a even more user-friendly Bible, because there's explanatory comments, there's maps, there's woodcuts, there's all kinds of cool stuff in there. And a couple, if you want, I'll pass it around and you can look, but just odd sort of aids for the reader, like the order of years from Paul's conversion, showing the time of his peregrination and of his epistles written to the churches. And so it's just this odd little table of what, the years of the nativity of Jesus, and then the years of the conversion of St. Paul. So 35 years after Jesus was born is the first year of St. Paul. And then it says what Paul did. So just, flip around a little if you would, if you wish. It's just a really cool book. I mean, 1560. I mean, and you look at that and all these tiny letters, and you think of those those guys setting those pages, one letter at a time. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, so we talked about that. Now there's another really cool thing to know about the Geneva Bible, which is, and you'll see it. Actually, I'll wait a minute. You can guess in a minute what that is. So Bernie, do you notice anything special about the way the Bible's laid out there?
It's just
Oh, flip ahead.
Oh.
Do you notice the column, the numbers there?
yes, so you can
Yeah.
address something quickly.
So, this is the first English Bible to adopt numbered verses. Chapter and verse. That did not exist until 1557, or well, 1550 something. Because that whole idea of the numbers for the verses, that was not from a theologian, it was not from the Church of England, it was from a printer, a French printer, Robert Estienne, 1551, for whatever reason, I mean, probably someone knows the reason or whatever, but he's the first one who, in printing a Bible, came up with this idea, hey, let's have little numbers for the verses, you know, to help navigate, keep track of stuff. And wow, what a great idea. Because pretty much every Bible since then has them. And has his, I think. I mean, I don't know, probably there's been a little bit of evolution in like where the where the verse numbers end and stuff like that. But basically, it was this French printer who is responsible for the wonderful verse division of the Bible. So the Geneva Bible, not only was it really cool, but it was a nice small format for private study with, like we're saying, notes, maps, tables, all kinds of cool stuff in there. And essentially it was cheap and available. I mean, cheap because they produced a lot of them. I mean, it was a lot of work, but they produced so many that they could, per unit, they could really sell a lot. Yeah, Rusty.
They're cheap. What do you mean? Like, what would it cost an individual or a church?
Yeah, and I don't know exactly, but if you think of like, if you work for a week, and that's enough for your food and lodging, maybe if you work a month, you might have enough extra that you could actually afford to buy this Bible or something. There probably is data available about sort of the wealth that
So you
people
would
have.
think they would have to spend like maybe 10% or 15% maybe of their annual income on these, or?
Probably not this one, but certainly like a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that thing of price of books and stuff is another whole world of stuff. But basically, enough of these were printed that if you really wanted a Bible, you could probably manage to get one. So anyway, and in fact, there were 120 editions and reprints of the Geneva Bible between 1560 and 1644. So this one was essentially a bestseller. This one really was a coveted item, and you can see why if you spend a minute or two just flipping around and see what it's like. All right, so moving on, we're doing well. We're at now Bible number 7. This is 1568, the so-called Bishop's Bible. And you see an image over there on the right, the Holy Bible containing the Old and New Testaments. The 16th century was full of controversy and distress, and so the Geneva Bible's notes and information, all the stuff that made it easy to read, that was sort of viewed as subversive and objectionable by some, especially, probably, like elders. And so the church bishops got together and revised the Great Bible in 1568. And this was essentially the official church Bible to be used in the church. So by definition, a bunch of them were printed. 22 editions of this one from 1568 to 1606. And it's characterized as sort of more Anglican, more dignified, kind of maybe Latin-inspired wording, if that makes sense. You know, kind of a stately vibe with a very trim Queen Elizabeth on the cover there. And it became the authorized version used in churches. But you know, at home, the Geneva Bible that's the one people wanted and had for home. And from the intro, I kind of picked up on this interesting little tidbit. So I just took a picture out of the book I was reading. It's illuminating to compare the number of editions of the various English Bibles published from 1560 to 1611, when the King James Version was published. So during that 50-year period, 5 versions of Tyndale, the New Testament, came out. 7 of the Great Bible, 22 of the Bishop's Bible. I mean, they're supplying all the churches around England. But over 120 printings of the Geneva Bible. So again, the Geneva is the runaway bestseller among them. And finally, we have a Catholic Bible in English. There had not been one until this one, and the name of it is called Douay Rheims. 1582, the New Testament was produced. 1609-10, the whole Bible. So it kind of came out in stages, like some of the others we've seen. The New Testament's what you really want to get produced first, and then the Bible, the Old Testament, it's far too long, and so Catholics, in effect, it's fair to say perhaps that the Catholics needed an antidote to the Geneva Bible, full of all the corruptions by the heretics that it contained. And so, what are you going to do? It's like, well, okay, we'll bring out an English Bible. And so the work on that was done at an English college in Douay in France, and then I don't remember the details, but then it was moved in 1578 to around, and so that English Bible for the Catholic Church was completed in France. And so now we find ourselves to English Bible number 9, which is the King James Bible. And so we can kind of start with the question, after all this endless bunch of Bibles we've been talking about, do we really need yet another English Bible, a sort of king of Bibles? Well, at this point, with King James, in the early 1600s, essentially the boring Bishop's Bible was the official one. The Geneva Bible was people's favorite, but with all that annotation and information, there was still a concern it might be a little subversive, and too much information or whatever. Maybe just a royally sponsored Bible would be good. And so, in fact, we have the King James sponsored Bible, which would be the authorized version. It would be, it'd be like a president of the United States producing a Bible and issuing it and having that be the I didn't say it. So, but the thing is, the King James Bible, it turns out, was a great Bible. So it's been characterized as the most celebrated book in the English-speaking world, and the the master text for, so the King James Bible came out in 1611 and was printed, reprinted, printed, just a gazillion times. And some editions, some later editions had extra levels of scholarship and review and revision applied so that the King James Bible, that is the master text for most of like what we have, like today, is based on Benjamin Blaney's Oxford edition of the King James from 1769. So there's, again, there's all kinds of activity through the centuries of reviewing, revising, studying, trying to understand, reissuing Bibles, and so that the King James Bible itself, similarly, came out in many, many reprints, and a number of substantial edits, revisions, and so on. And so we will talk more about that next week. Next week I have, similar to the facsimile of the Geneva Bible, I have a facsimile of the King James, the first King James Bible, and I'll bring that to show and share next week as well. And so with that, I think we are,
David,
that's it for today.
was
So,
the format of the Geneva Bible larger than your facsimile?
I think this is about the size
About the
of it. Yeah. That was my understanding when I bought it. It was a facsimile, including facsimile in terms of the original size. So those letters are pretty small, and they didn't have good vision care, back then. So I don't know, but yeah. So you could see the high level of professionalism that book printing and working with text had assumed by the time of that Bible, because all that work, all those tiny little letters, and oh my gosh, yeah.
David, when they have all these editions, but like in the New Testament, did everybody stay true to what they decided from 1400 to 400 as to all the books of the New Testament in the order that they were in?
Yeah, great question. Did everyone hear that? Did we stay true to, sort of from the 400s, St. Jerome, the Vulgate, the books and the order of the books, did those stay the same? Pretty much, yes. I think that the books, the books in the Bible, but it's tricky because when we say that, right away you have to think, well, what about the Apocrypha, the so-called Apocrypha? Because King James has it, Martin Luther has it, but then I think most of our modern Bibles we look at today doesn't. So what's in and not in the Bible is largely stable, except when it isn't. But really, just the very idea of getting to St. Jerome with the definitive Old and New Testaments the way he did it, I mean, that, settling that at that time with that text was really a huge accomplishment, because that text managed to essentially stay stable for 1,000 years. I mean, of hand copying. So anyway, but there's always kind of, things around the edge that people wonder about and maybe include and maybe not. So it's
We can thank Constantine for something
exactly.
To get the Bible started as a book.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The Romans, the Romans were not really allies of Jesus, and yet by the time 400 years, stuff happens, right? I mean, so by that late Roman Empire period, there is the capacity and the practice of working with the Bible and the churches being founded and all that stuff. And so, yeah, lots of history and, yeah, lots of interesting stuff. So, well, thank you again for coming, and we'll see you next week. And next week we'll talk a lot about King James, since we've sort of just arrived at King James. And so, very good, thanks, and see you next time.
Thank you.